The continent of Australia harbours a truly awe-inspiring array of spiders. And while the massive majority of these species are largely harmless to humans, Australia is nonetheless the home of some of the most venomous spiders on the planet, which has earned it something of a notorious reputation worldwide. But just how much should we fear these arachnids? In this video, we will be looking at some of Australia's deadliest spider species and investigating the extent to which they pose a threat to human beings. We will begin by taking a look at what are perhaps the most feared group of spiders on Earth, the funnel webs. But before we get into the specific species, let us have a basic introduction to funnel webs as a whole. Funnel webs were, until quite recently, classed as a subfamily within the Hexathelidae. However, a phylogenomic revision conducted in the year 2018 elevated the funnel webs to their own separate family, the Atracidae, shown here as sister taxon to the Actinopodidae, a group of spiders which we will be looking at later in the video. As of the latest taxonomic revision conducted in 2010, there are 35 currently described species of Atracids, which are further divided into 3 genera: Atrax, Illawarra, and Hadronyche. Genus Atrax contains 3 species, restricted to New South Wales, Victoria, and the Australian Capital Territory. Genus Illawarra is monotypic, containing only the single species Illawarra wisharti. The remaining 31 described species all belong to the genus Hadronyche, which is by far the most diverse and widely distributed of all the funnel webs. Now, for obvious reasons, I am not going to be talking about every single spider on this list. Instead, I am going to be focusing on the 6 species that have been documented as the cause of severe reactions among humans. That does not mean, however, that the rest of these spiders don't deserve a fair bit of precaution. Just because no severe envenomations have been associated with them does not mean whatsoever that they aren't capable of it. The first species we'll be looking at is what is undoubtedly the most well-known of all the Atracids, Atrax robustus, the Sydney funnel web. Atrax robustus, as one would expect from its common name, is found around the Sydney area, and its range extends into the Blue Mountains, down to Illawarra, and up to the Central Coast. Its presence in the most populated region of Australia, combined with the fact that it is significantly better adapted for an urban lifestyle than its relatives, are the principal reasons for the fact that Atrax robustus is responsible for, by far, the highest number of envenomations among any funnel web species. All severe envenomations recorded from this species are attributed to the mature males. These are armed with venom around 6 times more potent than that of the females, and their tendency to wander in search of a mate when it comes to breeding season means that they are much more likely to come into contact with humans. This is also the only species of funnel web that has been confirmed to have caused human fatalities, with 13 deaths associated with this species, most likely due to its proximity to human habitation. However, since the introduction of an effective antivenom in 1981, no deaths from funnel webs of any kind have been recorded. So in summary, this is certainly a spider that deserves a lot of respect, and its proximity to human habitation makes it probably the most dangerous spider in Australia overall. Nevertheless, like all spiders, they do their very best to avoid humans and only ever bite in self-defense, so as long as you leave them alone should you encounter one, you don't really have that much to fear. But if you are unfortunate enough to fall on the receiving end of one of their bites, be sure to seek medical attention immediately. Next up is Hadronyche versuta, the Blue Mountains funnel web. This is a large, heavily built species, even by funnel web standards, with a leg span of up to 90 millimeters. It is found, as one would expect from its name, in the Blue Mountains, but its range also extends out west to Goulburn and down south to Illawarra. Hadronyche versuta shares its distribution with a few other funnel web species, including the aforementioned Atrax robustus, from which it can be readily distinguished if one takes a look at its cephalothorax, which is, in simple terms, the front portion of a spider's body. In this species, and indeed in all members of the genus Hadronyche, the front of the cephalothorax is raised quite noticeably. Meanwhile, in Atrax species, the profile is much flatter. Within the genus Hadronyche, the degree to which the front of the cephalothorax is raised varies somewhat between species, which makes it quite useful for identification purposes. While this spider's venom composition is somewhat different to that of Atrax robustus, its bites have caused almost identical effects, meaning this species deserves to be treated with just as much caution. In addition, in this species and perhaps the genus Hadronyche as a whole, the disparity in venom potency between the two sexes is much smaller, with the females being of comparable and perhaps greater toxicity than the males. However, unlike Atrax robustus, Hadronyche versuta has not adapted quite so well to urbanization. As a result of this, it tends to be restricted to less disturbed habitats such as isolated pockets of rainforest, where it often burrows into rotting logs and stumps. The home site of this species is quite distinctive, with prominent crisscrossing trip lines radiating out from a single entrance. This is quite unusual for funnel webs, which tend to have multiple entrances to their burrows. So as we did with Atrax robustus, let us have a quick summary of Hadronyche versuta. So just like with any other funnel web, highly venomous, and in this case both the male and the female could be potentially lethal. This is however balanced out by the species' restriction to more out-of-the-way locations. As a result of this, it is responsible for far fewer envenomations than Atrax robustus. This, combined with the fact that funnel webs are very shy critters that avoid humans at all cost, means that, quite frankly, you'd be wasting your time if you were overly worried about these spiders. Next in line we have Hadronyche infensa, one of the most widely distributed of the Atracid species. This is a large species with a body length of 45mm and a maximum leg span of 90mm. It ranges from northern New South Wales upwards into southeast Queensland, where it is abundant in the subtropical rainforests of the Scenic Rim and the Duggan National Park. Hadronyche infensa is also the only Atracid species that is found within the suburbs of Brisbane, although it is predominantly restricted to the edges because, just like Hadronyche versuta, it is not particularly well equipped to cope with the habitat disturbance that comes with urbanisation. Hadronyche infensa is a ground-dwelling species that exhibits a particular preference for burrowing up against rocks. Their web structure is typical for Hadronyche species, consisting of multiple entrances with a network of trip lines radiating out from each. Studies concerning the relative toxicity of Hadronyche infensa venom have come up with rather inconsistent results. One, published in 1984, indicated that the males and females are of comparable potency, and both sexes are approximately 3 times as venomous as the male Atrax robustus. Whereas another study from 1981 placed this species on roughly equal grounds with the Sydney funnel web. Either way, it is quite clear that Hadronyche infensa is not a spider to be trifled with. Now, while it is certainly fair to say that any spider that could possibly exceed Atrax robustus in venom potency is not something to be taken lightly, Hadronyche infensa does not present a particularly large risk to human beings. In spite of its broad geographic range, its preference for undisturbed habitat, combined with its generally shy nature, mean that encounters with this spider are not particularly common whatsoever. On the off chance that you do encounter one, basic precautions are all you really need to keep yourself safe. At the end of the day, it's still just a spider, not Darth Vader. Next up, we will be looking at Hadronyche macquariensis, the Port Macquarie funnel web. This is a rather smaller atracid with a body length less than 30mm. It occurs along the north coast of New South Wales, including, of course, Port Macquarie. 6 envenomations have been attributed to this species, with one in which the victim was a 6-year-old boy, causing serious symptoms. Aside from that, there is little else to be said about Hadronyche macquariensis. It is a rather poorly known species that hadn't even been scientifically described until 2010. In terms of the potential danger it poses, it is most likely outclassed by another atracid that it shares its range with, Hadronyche formidabilis, which we'll be looking at later on. Next up is one of my personal favourites, Hadronyche cerberea, the southern tree funnel web. This is a moderately sized atracid that is found in New South Wales, with the Hunter River representing the northernmost boundary of its range. Hadronyche cerberea is one of 2 described atracid species that live an obligate arboreal lifestyle, meaning they are predominantly found in trees. It most frequently inhabits Melaleuca quinquenervia, commonly known as the paperbark tree due to the texture and thickness of its bark. It is this that also makes the trees an ideal environment for the spiders to set up shop, as the thick layer of bark provides plenty of shelter not only for the spider, but for an abundance of potential prey items. This is a highly successful species that proliferates throughout much of its range, and a single tree may be the home of numerous individuals. While coloration is typically regarded as an unreliable way to identify funnel-web species, Hadronyche cerberea may be an exception in that regard. The abdomens of these spiders are noticeably paler in comparison to the rest of their bodies. This, and the fact that they are the only arboreal funnel-web within their range, makes Hadronyche cerberea a distinctively easy species to identify. The unique arboreal habit of these spiders makes them very unlikely to have any run-ins with humans. In fact, only 4 bites have been recorded from this species. However, 3 out of those 4 envenomations did produce serious symptoms, indicating Hadronyche cerberea not only boasts a potent venom, but has quite a high inclination to deliver a significant amount. So, wrapping up on Hadronyche cerberea, this is quite clearly a highly venomous species. But the risk it poses to humans is severely limited by its distribution and, of course, its arboreal habit. A large number of unpleasant interactions with funnel webs involve digging around in gardens and whatnot. Not the kind of place you're likely to have a run-in with a tree dweller. Hadronyche cerberea is certainly a unique species, but there is another tree-dwelling funnel web out there that is much more formidable. Hadronyche formidabilis is the titan of the funnel webs. With a leg span of 120mm and a body length of 60mm, this is a spider that rivals many tarantula species in size. It is found in the subtropical rainforest of southeast Queensland, and its range extends into New South Wales, with the Hunter River likely representing the southerly limits of its distribution. Hadronyche formidabilis, like its smaller southerly relative Hadronyche cerberea, is an arboreal species, typically setting up shop in the vacant tunnels of wood-boring beetles. Their webs have numerous entrances, each fringed with triplines. These pick up vibrations from the outside world and carry them to the spider within. Their home sites tend to be quite well camouflaged, with pieces of substrate such as moss and lichen as well as bits of bark incorporated in the webbing. Like Hadronyche versuta, it seems that the venom of female formidabilis is stronger than that of the males. Even so, a documented envenomation from a mature male specimen still caused some serious effects. In terms of venom potency, these spiders rival Hadronyche infensa, and their massive size would allow them to inject enormous amounts of venom. In fact, Hadronyche formidabilis is a strong contender for the title of the most venomous spider on the planet. Yet, the overall danger these spiders pose to humans is pretty small because, you guessed it, distribution. Like practically all funnel webs, their populations are detrimentally affected by habitat disturbance. As such, their presence in urban areas is very limited. Combine this with their tree-dwelling habits, and you get a spider that you're very unlikely to encounter, even if you're a weirdo like me who goes out looking for them. So let's wrap up the family Atracidae, the heaviest hitters in the spider world. Every one of the 35 species is considered medically significant, and a suspected bite from any funnel web should be treated as a medical emergency. However, one must bear in mind that since the introduction of an antivenom almost 40 years ago, not one death has been attributed to a funnel web. While these spiders may seem to be very aggressive, not least due to their impressive threat displays, they are nonetheless very shy animals that will do their very best to avoid humans. After all, we are still far more dangerous to them than they are to us. The next group of spiders we'll be looking at is the family Actinopodidae, specifically the genus Missulena, commonly known as the mouse spiders. These are the sister taxon to the funnel webs, and as you would expect from their close relatedness, they bear a number of similarities to one another. Members of this genus, particularly the females, are quite similar in appearance to funnel webs. Both are heavily built, glossy-looking spiders that are typically black or dark brown in coloration, although on occasion some individuals will be a lighter shade of brown or even a brick red colour. Nevertheless, the two spiders can be quite easily distinguished from one another. The first identifying feature is the eye arrangement. In Atracids, the eyes are all grouped together in a very tight bunch at the front of the carapace, whereas in the genus Missulena, the eyes are far more widely spaced. In addition to this, mouse spiders are much stockier in build than the funnel webs, as well as typically being a fair bit smaller. Also, the caput, which is the front portion of the spider's cephalothorax bearing the chelicerae and eyes, is raised very steeply and very abruptly in Missulena species. Some Missulena species exhibit a strong case of sexual dimorphism, which is where the two sexes bear different morphological features. The mature males of some species, such as Missulena ocatoria, have very vivid warning colorations on their bodies, known scientifically as aposematic coloration. This is likely due to their diurnal habit, meaning they are active during the day. As such, they are vulnerable to a variety of visually oriented predators and would be exposed to a strong selection pressure to have a visual deterrent. Meanwhile, the males of Missulena bradleyi have a much more subdued colour scheme. This may be due to their more nocturnal behaviour and the resultant reduction of selection pressure from visually oriented predators such as birds. In fact, the only noticeable difference in coloration between male and female Missulena bradleyi is a pale blue or grey patch on the male's abdomen. Mouse spiders have a very broad geographical distribution compared to funnelwebs. They are found over much of mainland Australia in habitats ranging from forest to semi-arid bushland. This could be due to a couple of factors. Firstly, mouse spiders build lids to their burrows, unlike the open-ended burrows of Atracids, meaning they can retain humidity, and thus aren't restricted to moist microhabitats like the funnelwebs are. Furthermore, baby mouse spiders disperse by means of a method called ballooning, in which they attach themselves to a loop of silk and let the wind carry them for great distances. Most other mygalomorphs, including funnelwebs, can only disperse as far as their legs can carry them. The venom of these spiders is very similar to that of the funnelwebs, yet bites by these animals are often not quite as serious. Firstly, their smaller size prevents them from injecting the copious amounts of venom that Atracids are capable of. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, these spiders have a very high inclination to dry bite, in other words, bite without injecting any venom. Needless to say, dry bites are completely harmless beyond the physical pain caused by being pierced by those enormous fangs. So let's wrap it up with the mouse spiders. These are highly venomous spiders, there is no doubt about that. But just like the funnelwebs, they are extremely shy and will avoid us at all costs. Their tendency to inject little or no venom in a bite means that the majority of envenomations by these spiders are not likely to be serious. Nevertheless, medical attention should be sought as a precaution. Finishing off this Aussie spider collective is perhaps the most iconic of them all, Latrodectus hasseltii, the redback. This is an extremely widespread species, being found across pretty much the entirety of the Australian continent, from the outback to the bush and everywhere in between. They are a rather small, lightly built spider, with the females only having a body length of about 10 millimeters. Unlike the funnelwebs and mouse spiders, Latrodectus hasseltii is an araneomorph, a more derived group of spiders that is characterized, among other features, by the fact that its fangs point inwards towards one another like a pair of pincers. The redback is responsible for the highest number of serious envenomations out of any Australian spider. This is principally due to their ability to thrive in an urban habitat, as human habitation provides both a reliable supply of food and plenty of shelter. All serious envenomations come from the larger females, and have on rare occasion proven fatal. However, like the mouse spiders, redbacks have a high tendency to inject little to no venom, meaning that the massive majority of bites by these species produce only minor symptoms. So, while the bite of Latrodectus hasseltii is probably the least serious out of all the spiders on this list, your chances of running foul of this creature are much higher than any of the rest. But just like all spiders, this is an animal that will only bite if it feels as though its life is threatened. They are generally very passive spiders that will either flee or play dead if disturbed. As such, they are quite easy to safely capture and relocate. So Australia, quite clearly, is the home of some pretty venomous spiders. But the overall danger they pose to us is nonetheless greatly exaggerated. The funnelwebs, the most venomous of the lot, are reclusive and rarely encountered, preferring to inhabit pristine rainforest away from the encroachment of suburbia. The mouse spiders might be more widely distributed, but they keep to themselves just the same. Even the redback, the only one of Australia's medically significant spiders that frequently inhabits urban settlement, is still a very passive creature that generally poses very little threat to humans. As such, it's about time we recognised our spiders not for the strength of their venom, but for the vital role they play in our ecosystems. And of course remember that a spider will always be way more scared of you than you ever will be of it.